Welcome to Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Ray Smith, co host with Keith McDaniel. But Keith is tied up today, so we're going to proceed without Keith, but he will post this for us in a little bit. So I'm glad to have Danny Thomas with us today, and we're going to spend a little time talking about what Danny's working on. Danny, introduce yourself just a little bit for our viewers. I know we've had you on before, but it's time to catch up with what you're doing with your books.
Sure. Um, I was born in Durham, North Carolina, but grew up just outside of Oak Ridge.
Okay.
Went to the University of Alabama, then went back to North Carolina to earn a doctorate and to work in the public school district there for, well, several different districts for about 35 years, and now live in Winston-Salem with my wife. And we have two of our daughters who are here with their families and some grandchildren that keep me busy, but not so busy that I can't do a little writing.
Oh,
And
that's good. Don't you love those grandkids?
well, they do keep you agile. You got to be alert.
Yes, that's
Um,
correct.
and I had an idea to several years ago to write about Elza Gate, essentially focusing on the confrontation between the rural East Tennessee folks who were set upon by the military and the scientific communities to work on the atomic bomb in Oak Ridge in the period from 1942 to 1945. And it really is not a technical book. It's more of a book about how the people got along with each other, how they learned to take advantage of each other.
Yeah.
And I started off with Elsa Gate, which focused on 1942, and then Solway Gate, the most recent addition to the trilogy, is focusing on 1944. And the next book, titled White Wing Gate, will focus on 1951 because there's a significant difference in the stories of what was going on while the bomb was being developed as to what happened after it had been used, after it had been developed, and the idea that there were some negative repercussions in terms of health. A lot of people ended up with some problems that nobody anticipated. And then there were labor relations issues to come up because the atomic energies and the federal regulations got moved over to private industry. And a lot of questions developed over the time after the war. So that's the essential goal is to finish the trilogy with White Wing Gate. There are seven gates, and seven books is too many. I can't do seven.
Okay, you're right. But of the seven gates, the interesting thing to me about the White Wing Gate is the bridge that was there during the Manhattan Project. It was a floating bridge. You remember that?
Well, I'm gonna add that to the next chapter.
Do that. There's a good photograph that I can share with you of that bridge,
Oh,
and
by all means, please do.
and that could let you have a reflection back. In other words, you've got to go back and say, how did this gate even come to be, and why is this important? And then you can come back to the 1951 era. It will have been replaced by then, I'm sure. But that there's a I think there's a good way for you to do a think back and
I have
reflect.
plenty of research to do.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll share that. Before we go into that one any further, let's talk a little bit about Solway Gate. Tell me a little about what's in it.
Well, it's interesting. I found this out as I was looking back at what I've already written in the first two books. And I see a recurring theme, which of course makes sense if you understand that I grew up in a family with my father is a pediatrician, my mother is a nurse. And so there's a medical theme that runs through this, through several of the books because of the problems that people faced with their own health while they were working on the bomb or when they were helping others who were working on the bomb. And of course, nobody knew it was a bomb at the time. It was very
Right.
secret.
Yeah.
Um, but with Solway Gate, there are two chapters that make sense to me in terms of their significance. One is a chapter that deals with the Ebb Cade incident. And
Yes.
for people who are not familiar with Ebb Cade, he was an individual who was a worker, just a regular, I think, probably just a truck driver. And he had an accident and had some broken bones, and it was pretty serious. And he was in the hospital for um, longer than he should have been. They should have been able to set his bones and help him recover in a matter of weeks, but it took more like a matter of months. And I'm not sure they ever really cured him because they ended up using him as a guinea pig for nuclear research. They would allow him to be inoculated with something that was not necessarily in his best interest. They wanted to see how he would tolerate it, and he did. And I don't know the end of the story because basically Eb Cade left on his own. He departed without approval from the hospital, and I think ended up in somewhere in North Carolina. And I really couldn't tell you what happened at the end of his life or when the end of his life took place. But to me, it was a very, very interesting story about the morals and ethics of dealing with people who had been exposed to nuclear fallout or nuclear substances. And so I put a chapter in there about Ebb, and most of the details are fairly accurate. But like I said, there's a vagueness as to what happened to him in the end.
I'm going to read a section of your book. I'm going to read from page 174, and it says, they never did find Eb, but after Ellen worked from 11 at night until 3 the next afternoon, when she got back to the hutment, she had a little trouble getting to sleep, just flat out overtired. Pearlie'd been working with her from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and she wanted to talk, but Helen was too tired to listen. She managed to explain about Eb's disappearing from the annex, and naturally Pearlie, who was wanting to know more. Helen said, when we get back on the bus, I'll tell you what I know. I've got to sleep now. Now, that's just a little paragraph out of that story of Eb McCabe, which was, in fact, I believe he was injected with plutonium. And the story has been documented in Denise Kerenan's book, The Girls of Atomic City. It's been documented in other locations as well. And of course, Danny has taken it and fictionalized it to a point where these conversations that he's helping us to understand what might have been the feelings of people dealing with that situation. And I think that's good to do. So I appreciate what you've done in the book, not only about Eb Cade. I mean, that's a terrible thing that happened to him. Of course, they were doing experiments on not only on him but on other people at the time too, which it's hard for me to even imagine uh, that being the case. But there were things happening back then that just does not fit into our culture today. But in fact, it was people doing what they thought was the best things to be done, whether it was what we would agree with or not. And I don't obviously don't condone mistreating individuals like what happened to Eb Cade. So
Well,
tell me a little.
I appreciate you picking that segment because it comes from a chapter titled First, Do No Harm, which is part of uh, um, the oath that Hippocratic oath that doctors should be following whether it's 1945 or whether it's 2025, there is a whole series of questions about doing what's good for the patient, not necessarily what's good for you, the doctor.
That's true. Very true. Well, let's jump to today. What have you just done with this book, Solway Gate, that will make it
Well,
available to folks in Oak Ridge?
it's as you mentioned, I think earlier, it's at the American Museum for Science and Energy. They told me when I contacted them about the book Solway Gate, they said, "Well, we still have Elza Gate. We'll put those two close together and make them part of a series." I said, "Please do,
Yeah,
because I'm going to try to do White Wing Gate, and that'll be the end of the trilogy. And I hope that it'll be a good seller for the museum, and that it'll help people understand what might have been the situation, as you say, with fictional characters, but people that many of them that served as the models for my characters were people that I know about.
right.
And I'll mention a chapter that will be in White Wing Gate. It's titled Mouse House,
Oh,
and there was a tremendous study um, during and after the war about the effects of radiation on not human beings but mice, with the idea that if it had a particular effect on mice, that might help doctors and medical scientists deal with cures, or at least ways to alleviate the terribly negative effects that are possible with radiation. And I'm going to have two parts to that particular story. One is the official, I think it was Y12 um, um, operation with Leanne Russell, who was a scientist who was very, very renowned in regards to her work with radiation and how that affected mammals. And then the other was related to a neighbor of mine when I was growing up, the Kyles. Jim Kyle was a veterinarian who turned a corner in terms of doing research. He provided sterile, and by that I mean undamaged, untainted mice for research by many of the scientists in and around Oak Ridge, and in fact, all over the world. He had a tremendous operation where he would make sure that the mice were clean as they could be in terms of any taint involving their background, and he would sell them to the various federal and private scientific operations that were trying to find out what can we do to make sure that we're helping people stay safe, and is there some other way that this information can be of use to the federal government and to other medical facilities, et cetera. So um, there's going to be a tremendous amount of research I'm going to need to do to get that right. But as you said before, it'll be fictionalized, so I'm not going to libel anybody.
well, that's an amazing piece of the story that I'm sure will be of interest to readers about that mouse house. Now, let me help you with a little bit with the actual mouse house that literally was located at Y12 in Bear Creek Valley, but it was operated by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the facilities there in Y12. As you know, when the war ended, there were some empty buildings at Y12 because what had been used there to separate the uranium for Little Boy actually was now being done, that separation of uranium 235, we call it enrichment, but it was being done over at the K25 site with the gaseous diffusion process. So they had shut down those calutrons at Y12, and the buildings that had been used to prepare the feed material to go into those calutrons became known as the biology complex. And that was made available to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And that's where the real mouse house that I'm thinking of existed. Now, the one that I hope you're going to be talking about is a house that was literally there in Oak Ridge where the mice were being provided, and they did provide them to Leanne Russell and her research. Is that correct?
I believe they did, and the number of mice produced was astronomical. We're talking, I won't say millions, but it was hundreds of thousands of mice, and some of them were shipped and mailed all over the world, not just to Y12.
And this was a neighbor of yours.
That's right. In fact, the neighbor I'm referring to still lives in Oak Ridge. Her name is Deb Kyle Hotchkiss. And Deb, I send rough drafts of various chapters to her saying, "Do I have this right?" And she is quick to tell me, "No, you need to fix that, or you left something out."
I know her. Yeah,
Well,
a
a
great.
lot of people know her, and she
She's
is
a
a
great
real source for me.
photographer. Yeah, she's a great photographer.
Yes, her photographs are amazing. I
Hey,
have used some of her photographs in my books.
well, you know what we need to do? We need to get her on a hidden history story program here with you, and we will do that. Let's schedule it for the somewhere near the time your book is about to come out.
All right.
I
I'll get
think
in touch with you.
yeah, tell her what we want to do, and I will too. I'll talk to her. But I think that would be delightful to have her as a part of the program here. And when's that book going to be coming out now? How
Well, it's interesting.
I know you got some work to do.
Well, I have considerable research to do, and the books that I work on are somewhat organic. That is, they grow on their own. They take on a life of their own. I have a general idea about what I want to include and what sort of characters would be involved, but then the story itself takes on a life of its own, and I'm not sure how fast it'll grow or in what direction it'll grow. I
Mhm.
should mention that chapter that you read the excerpt from is titled First Do No Harm,
Right.
and it is related not only to the medical issues, but to the racial issues.
Oh.
The character of that particular chapter named Helen Jones is based on someone that I knew when I worked at Oak Ridge Hospital. And my work was just summer work. I was a painter. And there's a lot of rooms in the hospital need to be repainted on a regular basis. And I did that one summer.
Uh-huh.
And one of the ladies who was a worker there, black female, by the name of Helen Jones, used to talk to me on a regular basis when I'd come in to start my shift and she was ending her shift. She would talk to me about how things were going with my father. She, I think, was a grandmother to several of his patients. And I would mention that to him in the evening that I talked with Helen again today. And he said, "Well, ask her about so and so," because he had a great memory of all the patients that he used to deal with.
Mhm.
So I'm going to let that grow. I plant that seed and find out where it goes. And the mouse house is going to be a big part of that because of my understanding about Dr. Kyle and knowing his family and knowing Deb. And I want to try to build in some chapters on labor relations because I think that was a big deal after the war. A lot of people felt they could be paid better, they could have better working conditions. And it was not an easy time in Oak Ridge. There was a lot of tension involved, and I think there could have been some very nefarious deeds that I'll just have to dream up.
Well, that'll be exciting to see where you go with that. It was a tremendous time of change, that's for sure. That after the ending of the war and the transition, I mean, Oak Ridge was 75,000 people in August of 1945, and by 1951, it would have gone down to somewhere in the low 30s at least, and maybe even less. And of course, you're almost to the time frame where you can include the 1955 uh, desegregation of the Oak Ridge High School and the Robertsville Junior High, which now, some 65, 70 years later, we're beginning to try and recognize and provide a monument to what's being called the Scarborough 85. So I would hope you'll be able to include that in as you say, as the story grows.
Well, I appreciate that. That is something that I know a little bit about from 1956 when there was all the desegregation controversy in Clinton,
And
which is where I was happened to be at school at the time.
well, I think you'll have a good connection to make there, and especially while there was a lot of controversy associated with Clinton because of the outside agitation of at least two individuals, the Oak Ridge situation had some little consternation about it, but not nearly what was existing a year later in Clinton. And I'll be glad to help you. I'm working on the committee to get that monument, and I've put together presentations about the Scarborough 85. So
That's great. I
we'll
will interview you.
absolutely. I'll be glad to be a part of your research there. Also, you know that in 1958 there was a bombing of the Clinton High School.
That's
I'm sure
right.
you
That's
remember
right. I was in the fourth grade when that happened, and I
that.
remember Mom would drive us to school,
Yeah,
and we would go by the tanks and the Jeeps that were in downtown Clinton. It was an interesting time.
yeah, absolutely. And then Oak Ridge made the Linden School available to the
That's right.
Clinton High School for about 2 years, I believe, while they were rebuilding and repairing that or building a new high school
Yes.
in Clinton.
Yes.
So there's some good things to go into your story as it grows.
There's plenty of real good material there to let your imagination run wild, which is what I try to do. But I also try to make sure that some of the occurrences, some of the events, some of the characters are real life events and real life characters.
See, that's what I think about your series that makes it so valuable. You do the research and you are aware of the history. And while there has to be some liberties allowed you for the fiction, the story, building those kind of details. But the fact that you keep the historical accuracy of events, I think is very, very important. And you do it well. I've enjoyed both of the books that you've created. And
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It is sort of a balancing act to use real history, real events,
right,
but fictional characters and say this is how it might have felt to a person who was there at that time in that situation.
right. And I think it makes it more interesting reading to read as if you're in the character. And
Right.
my writing is all nonfiction, so I'm just citing facts and repeating stories and using details. Very rarely do I get to be conversational, and that's the difference in my mind in nonfiction and fiction when you can actually take a character and let them express their feelings in ways that might well have been accurate, but maybe you just don't know whether it was or
That's right. Let
not.
me read from the introduction to Solway Gate. This probably says it better than I've already tried to say today.
Yes.
Solway Gate is a work of fiction. All the incidents and dialogue and characters, with the exception of some well-known historical figures, are products of the author's imagination,
Right.
and thus are not to be construed as real.
Mhm.
Where real-life historical figures appear, the situations, incidents, and dialogue concerning those persons are entirely fictional and are not intended to depict actual events or to change the entirely fictional nature of the work. In all other respects, any resemblance to persons living or dead is entirely coincidental. So I'm walking a tightrope between fiction and nonfiction and trying to get as much information from sources like yourself and from books that I've read and from conversations I've had with people like Kyle Hotchkiss, and others to say, this happened. If I put a person that is not real into that situation, what might he or she have done? What might they have learned? What might they have done in such a way as to affect how things turned out? And was it by design or not? And in many cases, it was not.
I think that's very true. I admire what you're doing because I think you mentioned walking a tightrope or maintaining the proper balance. I think that's important to do, but it's also difficult to do. So it requires an extensive amount of research on your part.
I think you and I have spoken in the past about a book that I have read that helped me understand the issues with radiation, and that was a book titled Radium Girls.
Yes,
That one was really a sad, sad story where people were working on the
radium
production.
dial watches.
That's right. The watches that were used, I think, for military purposes. You wanted to be able to look at your watch in the middle of a darkened night and
Yeah,
see what time it was. So
right.
they put radium, they painted the numbers with radium.
Yes,
And just to have that watch on is not a problem, but to take your little brush, lick it, and then put it into the radium so you could paint the number, and then lick it again, put it back into more radium, allowed radium to accumulate inside the bodies of these innocent, mostly female workers, and the results were horrific.
yeah. Yeah, that's a sad story. And my wife, Fanny, worked in the Oak Ridge Associated University. She worked there for 35 years. And part of her career there was an administrative assistant to a scientist by the name of Evelyn Watson. And Evelyn had an organization in Oak Ridge Associated Universities called the Radiopharmaceutical Dosimetry Center. And they would calculate the dosage of all radiation accidents in the world, in fact. And they did a good deal of research on the radium dial workers and the exposure that they incurred because of licking those brushes that had radium on them. And again, you have to realize the time people who were doing that did not realize the danger of it, of just licking a brush. I mean, who in the world would think there'd be a problem there?
It was a brand new world,
It was.
and a lot of lessons were learned. Some of them were very happy circumstances, and some of them not so happy.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely right. All right. Well, I'm glad that we're talking about your trilogy. Is there anything more that you'd like to share with us about the upcoming White Wing Gate?
Um, what one thing that might be worth
Okay.
mentioning, for Solway Gate, I used some characters that appeared in the Elza Gate book, and I have plans in White Wing Gate to follow those characters to see what happened to them at a later time. Have to watch them grow up, to
Yeah.
watch them move from one job to another, from some of them to move away and then move back. So that is part of it that's not so organic, but I think that it will be valuable to show how things changed due to the atomic bomb.
I do think that that's a valuable aspect. The introduction of the nuclear age is something that it's not well understood just how broadly it has affected everything that we think, say, and do. Uh, our culture now is dominated by things that have resulted from the atomic age, the nuclear age, and Oak Ridge has been right in the middle of that. And as you may or may not be aware, there's a nuclear renaissance that's going on now, right now. Oak Ridge has uh, one small modular reactor that's being constructed as we speak by Kairos Power, out on the old K-33 site at the Heritage Center of East Tennessee Technology Park, where K-25 was. The Tennessee Valley Authority are going to be building small modular reactors on the old Clinch River breeder reactor site out very near there. The most recent announcement is Arano, who's building a centrifuge plant that'll be right at the intersection of Highway 95 and 58. This is said to be a multi-billion-dollar
Wow.
investment in the area, and there's another one. TrisoX is building over on the Horizon Center, building a fuel fabrication facility. And Danny, even Bull Run Steam Plant, which is shut down now, is being taken over by Type 1 Energy. That's a fusion energy research. They're going to build a stellarator there that will be producing electricity using fusion. Now, as you know, you may well know, fusion energy's been 30 years away for my entire career. It's still 30 years away today, but I think we were making more progress on it than you might recognize. Just yesterday, I gave a tour to a group of individuals from Great Britain who are working on the ITER project, ITER, in France, which is being managed by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And they asked me to give a history tour to a group of them that are here for just a few weeks. And I was able to do that. I took them to the graphite reactor and took them over to the K-25 Atomic History Center, the museum there. And it's amazing what's going on in that research as well. So Oak Ridge is right in the middle of a lot of things happening as a result of the nuclear age, not to mention nuclear medicine, the nuclear navy. I mean, we just got approval to bring in a conning tower of a submarine, and to recall and commemorate the fact that the nuclear navy had its start here in Oak Ridge when then Captain Rickover, Admiral Rickover, but he was a captain when he brought a group of people down in 1946 to attend the first reactor training school at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And when doing that, he realized that if he made a reactor out of highly enriched uranium, he could make it small enough to go in a submarine. And that resulted in the nuclear navy eventually. So nuclear medicine, nuclear navy, all things nuclear power, all of that originating from the nuclear age introduced in Oak Ridge. And lots of things happening during that time of tremendous change. Just I think more change than we can even realize. And it's most interesting to me to note that not too long ago, the Oak Ridge High School decided to take a look at the Manhattan Project and look at what may have been learned by what we did as that was being introduced and compare that to how we are introducing artificial intelligence into the situation that we live in today. And I think that's tremendous to think about Oak Ridge being the centerpiece of those kinds of dramatic changes that are taking place over time in our history and continuing today. Our mayor Warren Gooch just said yesterday at the East Tennessee Economic Council meeting where they were introducing the new Oak Ridge Corridor Development Corporation to try and pull these companies into Oak Ridge and into the region, not just the city. He said great things happen every day in Oak Ridge. And of course, he's right. And you're writing about it, and that's good. I think that's really,
There's a lot of stories to tell.
yes, there is. Well, thank you very much for being here with me today and for sharing information about your upcoming book, letting people know that they can get Solway Gate at the American Museum of Science and Energy and of course Elza Gate as well there. And White Wing Gate will be coming. Did you tell me when?
No, but I'm hoping it's in 2026.
Okay, very good. Well, and I look forward to getting Deb on here with us and talking about that. Well, let's try to do it uh, not too long into 26. Let's don't wait until the book is really
Okay.
ready.
I'll talk with Deb and
Talk
we'll
with
get
her.
back in touch.
Yeah, decide. We might could even do uh, two. We could do one while you're in the middle of your research with her, and then when you're actually ready to publish the book, we'll do another
That
one.
would be fine.
I think we can do it that way. All right. Well, thanks again for being on here with me and talking with me about the books, and hope everything continues to go well. And I'm serious about wanting to help you with your research. Anyway,
Thank you. I will definitely take you up on that.
call on me, and I'll be glad to help. Folks, our next program is with David Wachs. He is the producer of A Hole in My Shoes, and that's a story that talks about a man, a very unique individual, Jack Beers. He was here in Oak Ridge at a Secret City Film Festival that Keith McDaniel was conducting when David Wax brought that "Hole in My Shoes" video, and it was a part of the festival. Look forward to talking with him about Jack Beers, and also about what his current programs are. So be with us next time, and we'll learn about what David Wax is involved in now.